And look at everybody joining. This is lovely. Just for your own knowledge, about 105 people registered for today's event. I'm very glad y'all are joining. I'm going to go ahead and and get my kickoff slides set up as we let people come in. One of our panelists is a little bit late themselves, so it's all good. We have a little bit of time. As I believe Zoom is telling you, this session is going to be recorded and it is a webinar. If you end up having questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. There should be a Q&A down at the bottom. And I have that open off to the side here so I can keep my eye on it. Annie, it's good to see you as well. We have 22 folks so far. Excellent. We'll get started as soon as I see the participants joining slow down a little bit.
We got to kick out that Dean guy. He's not invited, right? Dean can't. Dean's out for sure. Hey, Dean.
We love everybody and everything. And if you're joining us from anywhere in the world, you are more than welcome. If you're staying up particularly late, thank you. I'm literally just back from Kobe, Japan, where I was attending the W3C meeting. So jet lag, it's a thing. And sometimes it's something we induce to ourselves without ever actually having to travel. And here's our other panelist. Excellent. Hello, Andrew.
Good afternoon.
All right. So why don't we go ahead and get this party started? Welcome to the first in our continuous identity webinar series, of which we are in part 1 of 4. The next ones will happen over the next few months. My name is Heather Flanagan. I'm the executive director and principal editor of IDPro, and joining me today are Sean Odell and Andrew Cameron, both longtime IDPro members and people who have a lot of practical experience with the whole concept of continuous identity and what that means in the world today. Quick note about IDPro, right? IDPro, if you are not already a member, we are a not-for-profit organization specifically for access and identity management professionals, giving these people a place to work on improving the profession, giving them a place to collaborate with each other, to give each other feedback, to bounce ideas off each other, or even to just, show cat photos or dog photos if that's what you want for your community. We are very welcoming. If you would like to join and you haven't already, or if you'd like your company to join, even better, please go to the IDPro.org website and there'll be more information there. This webinar couldn't be done without support from our members, particularly our corporate members, and I want to offer a special thanks to Signal for their support in helping make this whole series happen. We are, in the identity and access management profession, we're part of an entire ecosystem, right? We're in the middle of what's happening with people. We're in the middle of what's happening with certification. We're in the middle of what's happening with vendors, with events, with all sorts of things. So if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me or just start snooping around on our website for more information. There's a lot of material there, including a body of knowledge, which is freely available. As well as we have a YouTube channel where you can see some of our past videos and interviews of things that we've done. With that, I know this is not what you want to hear. You want to hear more about continuous identity. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer straight over to Andrew and Sean. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Heather. I'm going to try to share and not make a mess of things. How does that look? Hopefully everyone can see that fine. And I go into presentation mode. Okay.
Looks good.
Again, hello everyone. Really excited to be teaming up with my partner in crime and other things, Mr. Odell. I'll let him introduce himself. If you don't know me, my name is Andrew Cameron. I am a senior technologist for identity and access management at General Motors. We sell cars. If you don't know what GM does, Google us. We've been around a while. So I've been in the identity space for 20-ish years now. And don't let the gray hair fool you. I still am very useful in my in everything else that I do, other than just how long I've been doing this. So, as Heather mentioned, this is a series that we've put together to kind of bring the the best experiences that we can summon in terms of learnings around our journey to continuous identity as practitioners. And so today's focus will be about data. Um, there's lots of insights, lots of guidance that we want to be able to get into as a foundational element of this overall kind of four-pronged foundation of continuous identity. So today we're going to be focusing on data to kind of get us grounded in what these core concepts are. And as the future sessions that we're going to be getting into, they will focus on the other areas of kind of the pillars of continuous identity, which will also focus on things like orchestration, which is also a critical element that I'll be covering in a moment, and also policy and execution, right? And so look forward for the same, LinkedIn and all of the normal promotional avenues with IDPro to see when these will get scheduled. But we're looking forward to being involved and hopefully you join us on this journey as we try to share what we know and promote and bring us and kind of raise the floor of the industry itself on the importance of continuous identity. I'll let Sean take this, although the kind of slide kind of speaks for itself. But go ahead, Sean, and take your shot at explaining why data is like garbage.
Sean Odell. I'm gonna shorten my job title now to Principal Security Engineer for Consumer Workforce. Doing continuous identity. I work for the Walt Disney Company where we do not sell cars. Uh, FYI. This is continuous identity has been a journey for a long time. I think Adrian and I talked about it. How many years, man? Two, three?
2 or 3 now, yeah.
Yeah. So it's exciting to see it come to fruition, come to mainstream. Like we've seen some recent blogs come out. Simon talked about it. Ian's a big fan of it. There's a lot of swirl about it. So it's getting I don't want to say more real, but it's like it's tangible and the crossovers are huge. But this quote speaks for itself. I won't read it for you, but you have to know your data because if you get more of it, you don't know what to do with. You're gonna be like, oh well, I'm gonna make bad decisions with it. So it's important to really understand your data for sure.
Yeah, so this a wise man once quoted this in a podcast, and I had to use it. And so basically, in his example, he used the 5 keys of identity as joiner, mover, leaver, log in and log out. And his point was that log out was one of the major broken keys across identity. I would venture to say, and I'm just repurposing the metaphor for our purposes here today, is that data quality is also something that we have struggled mightily with in identity uh, since since I've been involved with it, right? And there's lots of reasons for it. There's lots of symptoms of why we struggle so hard to make our identity data kind of valuable and kind of elevate its importance in terms of how we manage it from an enterprise perspective. And I think as identity security and kind of the identity threat detection and response has kind of elevated, I think zero trust as a concept in recent years has kind of brought the the magnifying glass to identity data because, in short, your security policies will only be as effective as the quality as it'll be commensurate with the quality level of your identity data, right? And so if you're expected to move to a true zero trust model, to be able to uh, rely on clean, accurate, rich identity data is probably as important as anything else when it comes to securing access to your enterprise resources. And so, what we'll get in today, we'll kind of focus on that and highlight that as a goal. But this is kind of just again, we're going to hit you with a couple of memes, and this is one of them in terms of why identity data is so important. So the key components, again, today's focus, and I'll this really touches on two key use cases when it comes to what a continuous identity architecture solves. And today, really, we're going to be focusing on the structure and how data gets sourced from components that kind of we're is examples that we're covering here on the left. And what happens is that, again, if you've been in any of our previous talks, you know about the importance and how the shared signals framework and CAPE, as those standards, and yay for the standards committee, for folks like Sean, for bringing that to actually bringing that to a ratified standard to being improved. Uh, the SSF standard itself is now plays a really critical role in being able to rationalize bringing critical identity data from these sources and bringing them to a policy and orchestration layer, and a persistence layer to be able to take actions on it. And so, while today we're really just going to be focusing on kind of what the how data gets sourced and managed from sources like, for example, that we're listing here on the left. The remaining sessions that we're going to be getting into will deal with what is exactly goes on in this policy layer. What really does orchestration bring to the table, and why is it so important? We'll get into that in our future sessions. But essentially, what happens though is that a shared signal, a security event token, is what kind of gets transmitted through that layer, and that allows you to then trigger basically operations into your identity infrastructure. And so, typically, that would be involve interacting with an IGA platform, something like a SailPoint, something like a Savient, and then that IGA platform allows you to then kick off any number of identity events, provision, deprovision, and that's kind of how you can then bring this real-time event-based identity element into your governance platform. There's all types of benefits in doing so. It also allows us to kind of solve some of the issues that we've run into with IGA platforms that we've kind of discovered in recent years. And so this kind of enables us to kind of really bring and make our usage of IGA as a critical element in our overall security posture. It allows us to be more responsive there. Also, of course, that security event token is also something that gives us the ability to then execute access management operations. And so obviously, being able to send a message to our identity platform, to be able to send message to our comms platforms, to be able to allow people to take action and to be aware of events that happen in our overall architecture. There is a number of use cases in terms of threat detection and access management that'll be brought to bear as well once you start to dive into a continuous identity architecture. But we're going to get into uh, essentially how this data gets sourced, how it gets kind of persisted in an overall continuous identity platform, and then we'll be able to examine in a deeper perspective in terms of how we pull data from these different platforms like uh, human capital management platforms, threat detection, your scheduling, your systems of record, and your CMDBs. All of these end up being sort of core entities in an overall identity workforce identity data platform. And so everyone is using some sort of an ITSM platform today. Typically, that's how you manage your work in an IT environment. And obviously, the identity provider itself is a critical enabler, a critical source of identity data of how this platform gets formed. And the key thing to understand about this, and Sean's going to get into this in his slides as well, is that the 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 continuous element of ingestion and the low latency requirement of being able to ingest this data at a high volume, low latency requirement is really important, right? And so, especially when you consider how everything that we're starting to do these days revolves around agentic AI and being able to allow bots to act as people, that also triggers even a much higher requirement to be able to be responsive and to be able to be responsive in how we are aware of security events that could be triggered because of we have over permission bots or machine identities in the environment. Okay, so again, another meme. Apologies. This again highlights what I've covered so far, and where we're heading is that your identity data and the quality of your identity data. Everyone has identity data, and that part of it we're acknowledging, but that quality of it is your foundation, right? And so that's where, as we go forward, it's critical to understand that that foundation needs to be solid, right? It needs to be there needs to be identity data hygiene that happens. There should, in some areas, in GM actually, we actually have a team focused on identity data hygiene that actually makes it their daily job to make sure that we are getting the right level of data quality out of our identity data. And so that's why it's a foundation of how we move this forward. And so now let's go into a little deeper in terms of what types of identity data typically get ingested in a continuous identity architecture. And so typically it kind of revolves around three types. There are more that you could consider, but in general, we gets to be around these three types, where there's static data that typically is generated from what we would call get generated from your um, design time or admin time processes in an identity platform. User roles, group memberships, data sensitivity labels are examples of data that everyone has in their environment. And hopefully you use that data as part of how um, you fuel your risk engines and your decisioning engines in terms of using that as part of the contextual data that you're using to as you create policies around enforcement. So that contextual data then is another level of data that then comes from tools like EDR, right? And so uh, CrowdStrike, for example, is a source of contextual data that can give you a high, medium, low risk detection from a device management posture that ends up playing a role in determining risk in a continuous identity policy. And so those indicators are real time, right? They're being generated based on a number of factors that happen on a device. Identity is also now a critical enabler around contextual information in terms of identifying and flagging risk with user information. So that's also a source of contextual identity data that ends up playing a role in real-time policies. And then there's behavioral data. And again, that machine learning plays a role in behavioral data in terms of using logs, using real-time kind of metadata about the identity data, and being able to uh, create risk analysis and be able to create policy around uh, levels of risk that are identified in your environment. We'll get into some examples of how behavioral data is used in kind of continuous identity policies. That's primarily heavily analytics driven, and that's why kind of your security data lakes are getting more of a priority role in these architectures, because we need to be able to have your AI and machine learning tools to be able to crank on that data that is streamed on a continuous basis as well, and that needs to be able to play a role in how you make policy decisions going forward. So again, the sourcing of this data then typically, and again, I would encourage you to engage with our sponsors and take a look at their tools in terms of how different tools may implement identity data in different forms, but typically this data is represented in a graph, right? And so I'm going to get into a few slides to talk about concepts around graphs. It's various flavors of this, but as an example, one of the core elements of a graph really is the entity, right? And that's kind of a discrete object of a domain. Uh, with entities, then allows you to draw relationships to other sources. And so as you start to populate information in a graph, you start to populate attributes. And these, again, you're not just doing a wholesale copy of identity data just to bring it into a graph. You're really only bringing in what is contextual, what is relevant to being able to make policy decisions. So in examples that we're going to be talking about, you're going to be interacting with bringing in data from things like your ITSM for ticketing data. You're going to bring in data from your systems like PagerDuty for your on-call users, for example, and that the attributes that you bring in, which are contextual, which are not just information about a single entity, but you also then have the ability to bring in too far ahead. Now you also have to be able to create and draw relationships between that data. And so, in the case of a user or a customer, you could have a user who is also a customer. You could have a user who is also an on-call user, and then a graph actually then you start to generate relationships that allow you to traverse that graph. And because of the high performance that you get out of the leading graph databases that give you the ability to do really rapid lookups, and so policy evaluation in a graph enabled platform ends up being pretty highly performant, and it's why that most of the solutions that you'll see are dependent and start to leverage a graph database of some type as they build and ingest their identity data. I'm going to kick this over to. Oh, I'm still doing relationships. Okay, so
Hey, Andrew, can we go back 2 slides? I'm going to hit on one point you said. That's
yep.
kind of a uno mas, por favor. Not margarita though. Fantastic. As you bring in more sources, like Andrew stated earlier, start small, bring in one, bring in two, bring in three. Important thing is that you start small, get data right, build more, build more, build more. The more entities you bring into a graph, it means the more relationships that you can draw from, which means you get tighter context and more information. And you can start looking at things from an IAM construct like, are these accounts in use anymore? Do you really need privileged accounts for this person? What does this person access? Now, from a non-human perspective, what application is being used in what way? So IP based, is it user based? What's the user agents being used? The graph here solves both human and non-human, which is why the lovely logo that Andrew's growing to love has our overlord in the middle overseeing us on the bottom.
About this, yeah.
Yeah, the little guy up top, exactly. It's very important to know that the more you add to a graph with correct and quality data, you get better context and you get tighter coupling, which is very important, very important. Because as you go into the relationships, as you go into the relationship slides, you'll understand it. So go for it, Andrew.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so I tipped into relationships, and now the real value out of ingesting your data into a graph starts to kind of become clear because now you get to do relations between your entities. And in this example, you have a user who happens to be the same as an on-call user, and now we can start to draw relationships based on the attribute data that we're bringing in. So this example, we're talking about a same as relationship where a user is an on-call user, and then we're relating those entities by the email attribute, right? And so that join is something that we can use to traverse the graph, and that is what we use to kind of navigate the relationships that we create. And in this case, same as is one of the relationships. And so now it allows us to do things like blending entities. And so what you get out of doing that is that now I have attributes that I have stored on the on-call user that may not be available from the user object, right? And so on-call user schedules or on-call categorizations that might be available on the on-call user record. I can quickly traverse the graph to be able to get that information and use that in a policy decision. So that really ends up give you the real benefits of kind of building these relationships on a graph. And so now we start to transition into other relationships like different entities and how they are related. And so this is really kind of, again, one of the core benefits of a graph database where you start to, focus on your join attributes and focus on the different types of relationships between a ticketing system like ServiceNow and our user store like an Antro or an Okta, right? And so there's a number of different attributes you'd use to be able to do joins on, and you start to be able to infer other relationships like who is a ticket assigned to, who is the leader of a person that's on call. And so those are become, again, relationships that really play a critical role in policy evaluation. And so being able to be aware of these relationships and define them up front is pretty much a mandatory requirement. And to be able to have this kind of awareness of your identity data is the way that you get the most value out of a continuous identity platform. I'm going to kick it
Hey,
over to
Andrew.
Sean for any inputs there. Go ahead.
Yeah, go back one. I'm gonna just it's important. It goes back down to data quality. Notice that two attributes on two different nodes are not named the same, means nothing. Um, Assuming basic graph knowledge here, this is very important that uh, your provisioning is very clean. So when you're going to that ticketing system and your user base, and this is kind of how like the first when we first presented this out, the platform is a funnel. Everything should flow through it. So if you have like the right ingest from like Entra or your IDP or your HR systems or HCM systems, the data platform is where, like Andrew says, is your policy. If you have it funneled all the way through your platform and orchestrated, it makes your data clean. So by making this a platform as a product, it makes this easy. If you try to source this from like a Workday or an SAP and then source this from Entra and source this from somewhere else, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Speaking from experience, both of us, it's not going to work. Like it's just wasting money and time. So I cannot, I mean, at Identiverse, I mean, we harped on it enough. Know your data, clean your data. You have to start small. Start small.
And it really gets into critical importance when it gets into kind of being able to integrate your threat detection attributes as part of policy evaluation, right? And so I talked about CrowdStrike and I talked about kind of how other risk attributes get surfaced, but your WAF is another source
Yeah.
of risk detection data that not only do you need to be able to uh, understand what a high risk alert that comes from your WAF means in the context of a user onboarding or an authentication request, but you need to be able to have the correct actions uh, designed to respond to those events, right? If you just have a blanket policy that kind of just blocks access just because every alert is high, you're going to create a lot of friction in your user base, and you want to make sure that you have kind of an end-to-end perspective of what a false positive is, what a false negative is in terms of what these alerting mechanisms are giving you, because they have a longer lasting implications once you try to bring this into more of a real-time architecture such as this. So again, another example of relationships then gets to be a path is another relationship that we're talking about, and all of the same things that we're talking about, that it gives you that ability to expand the graph with additional sources, and it gives you the ability to traverse based on the relationships that you define. So here's another example you talked about too. When it comes in the ticketing system, you have relationships like assigned to or open for, which then brings in the relationship to a customer record where you get to know and infer that a customer opens a ticket, but a customer could also be an employee, right? I work at GM, I purchase GM cars, right? And so I have multiple relationships in terms of how policies could get evaluated, and those are things again that get surfaced and also, allow you to craft policy based on those realizations, right? And so these relationships, again, I could never do justice to kind of understanding how to design an identity graph in what we're covering today, but I just wanted to kind of highlight what actually gets built when you start to move into these continuous identity architectures, and the graph really is a really foundational element around that. Okay, so I talked ahead of my relationship building here, but again, this is kind of an example, and again, we'll be able to distribute these slides, but this kind of builds out the full example of how multiple entities get tied together and the relationships that get built into the graph. And again, imagine being able to traverse and process multiple millions of policy evaluations per second, per minute. That's where the real benefit of being able to understand these data relationships and have them on at a low latency, high volume availability is what ends up really being critical. Okay, Sean, you want to talk to this one?
Sure. So it's actually interesting what you just said about designing a graph. It is a journey. If you haven't done it before, moving from relational to graph, it's kind of a mind meld, but you figure it out. So join tables are the edges, those are the relationships, and tables usually are the entities, which are like the nodes represented here. So what you see here meant to be very high level because you can do this many different ways. But what we're doing first, I'm zooming in because I have glasses on. First off, the if you look at the top node identity, that's the same one, but we're just showing how it's an extension of, like, on the left hand side, walk identity down to the second level. Like, an identity is assigned to an assignment. What is assignment? Um, I have, like Andrew said, Andrew's a customer. He's also an employee. I'm also a guest at a park and an employee. Still Sean, the identity. What's my assignment? What's my identifier? It could be my employee number. It could be my parks number or my streaming ID, right? The whole point of the graph is to get down to as lower level as you want to go. So if you go to the third level, the third layer down, this is more of a workforce example, but you have an assignment. So identity is assigned to an assignment that is in a country, in the location of an address with attributes, with status reasons, with a status. This means like employee, retired, withdrawn, on leave, take your pick. From a security standpoint, this is awesome because then you could actually start introducing political states like person of interest or under attack, which then in a graph, I now can go look at what have they accessed, what do they have access to, and what have they submitted. So the graph can really shrink down your SLA from, okay, that Andrew guy from that link, he shouldn't have, but he did it. Okay, well, now it's like, okay, call up the data team, do some Pythoning, go into SQL. Oh, it'll be a couple days. Whereas with this, it's more like, okay, Andrew, button click. What do you have access to? Then you literally can go traverse the graph and get all the answers. Again, not like in 15 seconds. Takes work, but once you start adding more and more context to a graph, it gets a lot easier to answer questions. And then we'll pepper in the lovely two-letter vowel term we all love to hate to love is AI. Once you layer on AI onto this, it makes it a lot easier. So you can ask it natural questions, but getting your data right is very important. So if you look on the right-hand side of the identity graph, this gets you the purity of what an identity is versus what an account is. So identity is born on with birth in some locality, which is in a region, which is in some country, and area codes are in countries. Designing it's not that hard. If you walk it down on paper, building a graph like this is not rocket science. It's just thinking it through and getting it right. And it's okay to get it wrong a couple times. You're going to blow it up, try it again. But having done it a couple times, it's once you get the hang of it the first time around, it becomes second nature. So what you get out of this, if you look at this the right way, when you're building a graph out for identities, you get both human and not human for the price of one. and not the cost that some vendors want to charge you for storing non-human identities, which is astronomical. We can go to the next slide, Andrew, I think. Yeah, the fun part. So this is going to be an eyesore, but just go with it for a second. This is not the only way you can do this, but to give you an idea of scale, streaming, and getting it in, this is kind of like we'll call it data collection, but it reads left to right. So there are some sources you could aggregate to and get some stuff ready. Then as it's cleansed, you can combine it, make it stable. Then you have some consumers. Notice the baby on the top right because you're crawling right now. You're figuring out how to do stuff. Not even in graph world yet. We're in the, as Andrew said, is our data even good enough to do anything? And we don't know yet. So this is the crawl phase, right? So the one important fact to note here, the arrows are kind of hard to follow. The sources are done by type. So if you go after, can you go back one, Andrew?
Sorry.
All good. One more. Yeah, okay, cool. The sources here are done by type versus instances. What does that mean? Like I don't need to know about Azure's graph and then AD, and then I need to go get this API from this service. If you look at your sources by type and you design for like REST, I'm not going to say SOAP because we don't do that in this world anymore. But if we do like databases, Andrew, shake your head no, right? Yeah, cool, fantastic. If you go and look at logs and like your logging platform, whether it could be Datadog, it could be Splunk, every business has their own poison. Abstract it as high as of a level as you can to get down to your sources are just types. That way, when your collector, the second brown box, pulls them in and schedules it, makes sense because you're not streaming yet. You're still figuring out how do I grab this stuff because you haven't even gotten to the stream part yet. That then goes into your cleanse column, which is like transform it, put it into some format you like, conform it, and then ship it over just for some views and some analytics, and then put it into a database, and then we can see how bad this really is, right? This is the crawl phase. So now when we go to walk, and we're going to stumble a few times, but we're gonna get there. There's some new stuff in here. Events. It's a term called an event bus with streams. Notice the collector goes to the event bus because we're designing for reuse, right? So collector goes to the event bus, which goes back down to the stream, which then you're getting towards more real-time data. And that's the part where your collector and your schedule come very important. So when you're doing anything with real-time analysis, you kind of want to have parity on time frames. You don't want to have your stream being milliseconds, have your batch being 10 minutes because it's going to skew a lot of your models and a lot of your analytics. So as real time as we can be in workforce, the sweet spot from what I've seen is about a minute or two, depending upon how much money you want to throw at infrastructure or the tooling you have in place. But it could be 5 minutes, it could be 130 minutes. Just make it the same. That way you don't have to worry about time skew, that is. It's all said and done. Now we have a data lake. Ooh, what does that mean? So if we dump it isn't a swamp, it's a lake now. It's clean. You put some tablets in it and you actually can see in the water. It isn't like I won't say Lake Michigan. Sorry, Andrew, but there's a lake in Florida that's pretty bad too, Lake Apopka. It's like almost green, right? Now you put some views and analytics on top of that, and then you could present this to more consumers, like your security team, some ITDR stuff, and even start some systems could actually use it. This is where you're getting into your data platform could be a product, which then gives you to the running phase, which will look like next. There we go. The only thing different now is there's these lovely things, ML and AI and bots and security. This is as mature as you're going to get, depending upon your budget, what you can and can't do. Will this work if you can only use like a Splunk out of the box? Absolutely. But this is kind of like if you had Greenfield and wanted to do this. This looks really hard. It's if you break it down into bite-sized chunks and do it incrementally, you can realize this in a few quarters, little by little. But the key is start with small data. Know your data, start small.
The key thing to understand about this and why the data is so important is that, whatever you call it, in this cleanse and combine area, whether it's data lake, security data lake, swamp, however you categorize it, but some repository of correlated security data sources needs to be part of your overall security posture, right? And how you actually enhance that posture. And then, it's not to say that you need to go and build the most sophisticated machine learning and analytics to be to actually be an enabler of what's in a security data lake, but you need to be able to have some sort of a capability of applying rule sets on your historical security data, right? And that's why identity data is so important. And then the data about the data, the logs and the metadata about all of the events that are happening, because there's so much that gets generated in your environments, right? There's data about group management. There's data about role activations. There's data about privilege access that all, again, gets forwarded into a security data lake. And to be able to respond to those. And so, you need to know if there was an improper activation of a global admin role in your environment, right? And hopefully you have policies that are more proactive about it, but you also need to be able to have the ability for your analytics platforms to be able to surface those alerts and help you take action much sooner than later, right? That's the real kind of benefit once you can get to a model such as this.
Go to the next slide real quick, Andrew. I think the other one will point it out pretty clearly.
I jumped ahead of what his slide was highlighting, but yes.
There you go. Literally what you just talked about, and you stole my thunder, Thor. Take it. All good. No, it makes complete. I mean, you hit it nail on the head. No need to beat that horse. So you're totally good there.
All right.
So why do we care? So this is this lovely animated GIF, which is awesome. Thank you. No AI was used in the rendering of this, just FYI. I think what you get out of this as a product, you get some modeling, you get some risk scoring, all great stuff. You get to layer onto your CrowdStrikes, your XDR platforms to bring your own modeling, your own security, because some companies need that, some companies don't. And if you don't, that's totally okay. But if you're a bigger company, everyone's always a snowflake. Yeah, but this is cool. We need this one little thing. This gives you that. So the key thing here is, and I think this is pretty prevalent. Last Identiverse was continuous contextual identity is what's going to drive us in this age of workflows, machines, AI, agentic, all the lovely buzzwords. But we're moving at a pace that's so fast that most companies' data not ready to catch up, and it needs to be. So the last blue box is something Andrew and I are pretty passionate about, right? So this is where you see a lot of convergence with IGA, PAM, and provisioning. And I'm going to talk this through. I'm working on something in an identity in depth series that we're going to be partnering with a bunch of platforms, not platforms, but a bunch of like IDPro, Identity Underground, things like that, and blog posts on this to get really in detail on this. But if you look at what we've presented and shown, privilege accounts, we have accounts there, who has access to what has access to what, provisioning into the flow, out of the flow, just from what Andrew showed in the first architecture diagram. You're starting to see a convergence of appliances and platforms like IGA and PAM to be vendor agnostic here. This kind of makes it very interesting in that space because I'm starting to see that there is no more privileged access. It's just access. And identity governance is an appliance now, whereas the real meat and potatoes is in what Andrew spoke about earlier. It's the policy. But you can't get to the policy without the data. Key foundational piece. So that house he showed, where half of it was like broken off, most companies are there right now. There's a few that are like trying to jump the little gap and be like, oh, look, we're foundational now. Getting there should be like number one in your transformational plans, and where I think most investment should actually be made right now. But I cannot stress enough on that there is convergence coming. If not, it's already here. I mean, I see it clear as day. Andrew, you as well?
I do, and I think I hate to bring in another buzzword, but it really is. I think it's important, and that's the identity fabric, the service fabric, and
Get
you
it. All right.
know, there's a lot of value in, especially if you're driving towards a zero trust architectural posture, that being able to kind of what Sean talked about, being able to abstract the IGA platforms and that abstract PAM from being this standalone experience-based interaction that has to happen to being more of a appliance. I think that the existence and the kind of the rise of identity service fabrics are going to kind of facilitate that happening, right? And so basically, it makes you more vendor agnostic for being able to perform a lot of these same. There's again, the vendors again all have huge benefits to their products, and I'm not discouraging the usage of them, but they do provide, every product basically provides API based interactions to their platforms, and the better you are in terms of being able to understand how those features enable your overall security architecture, that's where you really start to get the value out of moving towards a continuous identity architecture, because now your events are dictating how you interact with IGA. Your events are dictating how you trigger a PAM or a PIM activation, and so that takes you away from logging into a standalone tool, being able to execute critical IGA functions, and it makes it more of a continuous, more of a consistent, I should say, user experience
Can you
when you
go back to
engage in
slide?
your identity services. Yep.
Sorry, Andrew. Could you go back to slide 6? It's the ring where it's like before or after your architecture one. I think it was slide 6.
Tell me when to stop.
Heather, where's the music? I'm joking.
Was it
I think
this
it's
one?
there, right there, that one.
Yeah.
So you see around the blue ring, like I threw the buzzword in, I didn't say it, so Andrew took the bait, which is fantastic. A lot of vendors are preaching they have the fabric, they're pioneers in the space, in the industry. The fabric term is your APIs that hook up to your data lake. That's all the fabric is, right? So the continuous ingestion analysis is what rides on the fabric. So that the fabric is how you connect all of your IAM appliances, like what we have here, to make the execution part do the work, which is what we'll talk about in fourth part of our series, right? It's important to tie together that the outside ring are your sources, the arrows coming in is the ingest, the ring is where the fabric is, and there's an awesome graphic for this that we didn't throw in because there was so much to compress it to an hour here. But it's very important to know that I personally believe you should not outsource your fabric. That should be yours because that makes
I
you
agree.
vendor agnostic, right, Andrew?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a core capability that an
Yep.
enterprise should own itself. Yes.
So then you get the dubious honor of going forward 10 slides back to where we were.
Where to go
You're
back?
gonna cheat. You're gonna cheat. Smart move.
Okay, so I'm going to start here and then take us forward here. There we go.
Yeah, so the QR codes are safe, I promise. I don't want to hear anything from Dean or anybody being like, you threw QR codes up on they're safe, I promise. They're podcasts or presentations that I have on my site that just link out to presos that Andrew and I've given at Identiverse or podcasts that we've done on numerous areas. More are coming. Reason why the presentations and podcasts are there is Andrew and I are doing this with a couple other practitioners. We're doing an identity in-depth series on a lot of stuff. And I think we're kicking that off we now have the right stuff involved to kick that off pretty soon to where we're going to go even deeper than this. So Identiverse is like, okay, idea, a little deeper here, and we're going to go even deeper. But that's going to be more of like a blog or I'll say a white paper, but like a technical blog. Like, okay, cool. How do I do this? Right. So that's that. And then the last screen is going to be an awesome one, which, who we are, how you talk to us, do a little jab at Andrew on the bottom one. So you're welcome, Andrew.
I mean, I'm in Identity Underground. I got to get my handle. I'm in there. I'll update
I
the
didn't,
slide with my handle there.
okay, I didn't see it, but I looked for you 2 ways from Sunday. I'm like, I can't find it. You can only spell
Oh,
Cameron so many ways. I'm like, and Andrew, I'm like, okay. But we're active all over the place. Happy to talk more about it. Our lovely panelist, Heather, moderator, empress of all the things, has told us to leave
We
time for
have
Q&A.
we do have time for Q&A, which is excellent. We already have a question in our list from Hannah Suter. Are there particular pieces of data that are non-negotiable and that we should make sure we have in our fabric? When there is so much data that should be captured, how can we be sure that we are prioritizing capturing the right data?
Hannah. So
wonderful question.
I can tell you the personal journey that I've been on, and so can Andrew. We looked at the biggest value we could bring with the smallest scope to deliver value iteratively. Awesome buzzword from a business context, right? So I can tell you 100% certain HR data to me, you have to have that. That is core. HR is number one. And I think if you have any type of endpoint security, those are the big two things. Because the easiest value for this, easiest value, and Andrew, you can
Yeah,
argue with
no,
me
that's
here.
right. So
Security.
it
Yeah.
will focus around your use cases, right? And so,
Yeah.
for example, if privilege access is a use case that you want to tackle first, and so what are the sources that play a role in privilege access? Like you're saying, it's your EDR, it's your workforce, person information, it's device information if you're doing device management, and then it's being able to identify, who's giving you the threat data that you trust the most, right? Because now you're at a point where now you're getting threat data from multiple sources. You can get your identity platform gives you threat data about risk with users as they log in, about user and session risk. You're now at a point where the device management platform, so your Jamps and your Intunes are generating threat and risk information as well as what you get from your EDR solutions where they, CrowdStrikes and wherever else that are generating threat data. So those kind of end up being the main sources of what you would use in a policy, and it should always be driven, in my opinion, should be driven on the use cases that you're targeting to kind of get things started, right? You don't want to do the boil the ocean thing and to try to tackle every use case as you roll out. Like Sean said, take something small, attainable, and start to identify what those key sources are, and then you can use that to build on more use cases as you expand the platform.
Fantastic. All right. So Pablo Valoriza
Yeah.
also had a question. Says there's a lot of emphasis on clean identity data, which makes sense, and he fully agrees with. The question is, what are some examples of dirty identity data? Because he's trying to see if they have the right understanding or context.
The irony is the next question being asked is an answer to the question that literally Pablo asked. So kind of funny, but
All
dirty
right. Well,
identity
then,
data.
how about I read out that next question and you can get
Yeah,
both
go
of
ahead.
them.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one is from Elisa Abedrapo. Shall you crowdsource your own "quote unquote" organizational data from team managers when HR data keeps being behind from reality due to constant change in business and M&A activity?
Yeah. That's a great answer and question to a question that's an answer, which is kind of ironic here. The the thing is, if it's not clean enough, let's just say 80%, and call that very subjective, don't even use it because the minute you introduce it into your platform, you are going to spend so much time operationally trying to fix all that data issues. Don't use it. HR is a little bit different because you're kind of like you have to. And that's where you pick attributes that you know are better. Perfect example, right? You never would write a policy on someone's job role or job title because senior can be SENIOR, SR, SNR.
Yeah.
Engineer could be ENG, VP could be VP, vice president, vice pres. Looking at things like job code, organizational unit, numerical things are a little bit better. But even then, at that point, that's where you have to the source you ingest, you need to go engage with data subject matter SMEs and say, here's what I'm trying to do from an IAM standpoint. What data can I use and what are my caveats and my gotchas? And if that's more of a relationship and a partnership thing that you have to do. But from that's one piece of dirty identity data, and one's called this one out, which is fun. Device data. Oh, that's almost as bad as HR data because what's a thumbprint? What's a fingerprint? I, I mean, every vendor will tell you, oh, ours is perfect. No, it's not. And that's where it's be cautious, know your data. But the question here is, those are the examples of dirty data. Like if you know Andrew's devices, its ID is 4. Then all of a sudden your integrating system is like, oh, we're just going to change all the IDs under the covers from you. You're secure. No one can log in the company. You've accomplished your mission, but your stock price is going to, do this.
Yeah, anybody that's ever been involved in a reorg can understand the value of how much you trust org level data in policies, right? So that's something that most identity practitioners get burned on, once or twice, and then they figure out not to do that anymore and doing, something. If you can do dynamic based policies, which some of the platforms support, that's great, and you are not, polluted with kind of stale org level policies, then that's great. But yeah, what we have seen, and we do so much, there's we end up creating policies for thousands of people that report up to a particular executive, and then that executive is gone, and then we repartition their organization across 3 other executives, and then it's just access control policies then are all blown up at that point, right? And so you have to have the ability to either not do that kind of trust to an org chart, or to use some other means to be able to do that kind of a policy management approach. So those are some of the things to be aware of, right? Is a huge contributor to dirty data is org charts.
Okay, so we've got 3 minutes and 3 questions. Think you can do it?
Let's go.
Okay, first one from Donald Shepard. Why are you calling this an identity architecture when it seems more like an overall cybersecurity solution?
I don't disagree with that. I would call it. I don't
Identity
disagree with the
security
question.
architecture.
I think the gentleman is has a good point. I don't disagree with it.
I would articulate identity security architecture.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
That's a good blend.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question, Hannah Suter. On the topic of use cases driving data collection, what are some of the main use cases you see for continuous identity that would likely cross most companies?
Access management and provisioning.
Yep. Privilege access in particular is easier to start with. Being able to focus on privilege roles, cloud privilege roles, the people that have keys to the kingdom, making sure that you will have policies around anybody that has sort of like a global admin access or a project admin would be the key areas I would focus on starting with.
Okay.
Donald's is funny. I can't wait to hear this.
Last question in the last minute from Donald Shepard again. Data standards and quality seem like a traditional issue for databases, the classic CMDBs, et cetera. Has anyone really ever solved the data integration issue?
We're trying. We're trying, sir. I mean, I think in terms of what it means to identity, I think there is a sort of a nexus of sources coming together under most large enterprises are doing the ServiceNow thing or some equivalent to ServiceNow, and it really requires you to know your data. ServiceNow has its CMDB capability, and you really can't even get value out of the tool if you don't have your CMDB integrated properly, and that feeds like everything else, right? I mean, you can't open tickets on infrastructure if you don't have your CMDB properly correlated, and so I think these platforms are giving us the tools to be able to do it. It's just that it's turning battleships, right? Because there's so much historical legacy baggage that it gets created that if you don't have those good practices in place, it's hard to just pick up a tool, pick up a SaaS tool and start getting the benefits out of it.
It's
All
a
right.
the way I
Go
look at
ahead.
it.
Last minute, Sean.
The way I look at it is you can't rely on that team to do it with you. You have to bring along all the stakeholders, as cliche as this sounds, and be an important voice in that room and a decider. And I'm gonna hit you with something that's a little bit out of the left field. It's actually easier to get a proper CMDB of modern identities like workflows, Lambda functions, EC2s, stuff in the cloud with certain protocols, certain implementations. If you're a mature enough organization to do things like Spiffy, for example, like register on first use, that's wicked easy. But then you have to worry about source A and source B, right? I can tell you that there are some companies that are making good headway across that. And here's why: cost savings, software optimization and rationalization will drive the ServiceNows and the Salesforces to come to the table and be like, okay, do it the right way. Because the way you're going to get this done is by cost savings from a company standpoint. And I'm seeing it happen now. Sadly enough, I am, because of that.
All right. We are over time by a whole minute. Thank you, everybody, for joining, for asking questions. Stay tuned for the next one in the series, which, if I recall correctly, is going to be about orchestration, and it will be announced in our usual channels on LinkedIn, on our IDPro newsletter, and on the IDPro Slack. Thanks again for your time today, Andrew, Sean. Fantastic work, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.